The iPhone 6s Plus is almost turning 7 years old now, and it still is one of the most iconic iPhone generations in history. The 6s and the 6s Plus were first released in September 2015, and it became one of the best-selling iPhones of all time. Now that we are halfway through 2022, let's take a look at the phone and see whether or not it's still worth your money. Starting with the price of the iPhone 6s Plus, when it was first released, it sold for $749, $849, and $949 for the 16, 64, and 128 gig versions. And now, if you look at the used market, you're looking at some good deals out there for only $140 to $200 depending on the condition. I got mine on Carousel for about $134 or 6,700 pesos. And the price is quite close to my Android phone, the Redmi 9, which I got brand new for $129 back in November of 2020. If you ask me, I think I like the iPhone more despite it being older and not having a key part I would have wanted. And that's the thing with buying old flagship phones. It's kind of like buying an old supercar. Yeah, sure, it's probably less fuel efficient and has outdated technology, but it's still also likely fast enough. This iPhone is almost 7 years old, but it's still faster than my new Redmi 9. The animations are way smoother, the UI is great because of course it's iOS, and even games run very well on this device. I installed games like Call of Duty, F1 Mobile Racing, and Azul Racing, which didn't run all that well on my Redmi 9. But here on the iPhone 6s Plus, it was a great experience in terms of high frame rates. It's very consistent and you don't get frame drops. You'd think that on paper, with only 2GB of RAM, this phone would perform below average, but that's far from the case. Because of the Apple A9 chip, it can handle several apps in the background. Opening them is pretty decent as well, and overall just using them feels fluid. No weird stutters or animations. However, the thing that I noticed immediately when playing those games is the battery life. You probably already know what I'm talking about, and yes, it doesn't last that long at all. It has a capacity of only 2,750 mAh, which is pretty small. In comparison to the Poco M3 that I've reviewed before, that thing has more than double the capacity at 6,000. On heavy usage like playing games, you're probably only getting around 2 hours of battery, which by today's standards is absolutely terrible. I don't really play mobile games that much though, but if you do, then this phone will mostly be spending its time on the charging station when used heavily. On light to medium usage though, like watching videos, listening to music, scrolling through social media, I get around 2.5 to 3 hours on 87% battery health. So if you're not a heavy user and if you're okay with charging this phone 2 or maybe even 3 times a day, then you should be good. Speaking of charging, with a standard iPhone charger, this charges up from 20 to 95% in about 3 hours. Next, let's talk about the build. Now, if you're getting one that is good condition and doesn't have scratches or chippings, you will probably spend an extra $20 to $40 for that. For mine though, I think that this was the lowest deal that I could find. The battery health was at 88%, and it did have quite a few scratches. The sides of the phone have also chipped up a bit, but it isn't all that bad because the display itself is quite clean with only a few minor scratches. If you remember Bendgate, you know that was the iPhone 6. This is the 6s though, which means that it's the more durable version. And even though mine isn't at the best condition, it still feels premium because of that aluminum body, which is obviously way better than plastic. Regarding the actual buttons of the phone, the alert slider is quite worn out, but at least the power and volume buttons are still decent. And the fingerprint sensor is working fine as well. Not the fastest by today's standards, but it is sort of quick. Now let's move on to the display. It is a 5.5-inch 1080p IPS LCD panel, and even today it's still pretty good. Once again, I compared it to my Redmi 9, which also has a 1080p display, and I couldn't really find much of a difference except for the fact that it leans towards more saturation than the iPhone. Of course, because this is a 2015 phone, it has those huge top and bottom bezels. Although for me personally, it's really not a huge deal. It is only Gorilla Glass 1 though, so it's not going to be the most durable screen ever. And in addition to that, this also has some of the best speakers I've ever had on a phone. It isn't really the loudest and it tends to distort at about 80% volume and higher, but it still sounds really good. It actually has bass and overall it's really great for music, playing games, and watching videos. Remember earlier when I said that this phone is still very smooth when navigating through apps and playing games? Now let's talk about that software experience. When first released, the iPhone 6s Plus was on iOS 9, and because of that Apple support, you can still upgrade to iOS 15.6, which is a fairly new update. 7 years and it still has updates. You can't really say the same for most Android phones that only have updates for 2 to 3 years. Using iOS 15.6, it's pretty smooth as you'd expect. The animations are smooth, going through apps, playing games. You won't really have any major issues when using them. From my experience, this is actually the smoothest 60Hz phone I've ever used, and that's also probably true for other iPhones before the 13. And lastly, let's look at the cameras. Yes, there is only a total of 2 cameras on this device, one on the back and one on the front. In today's world of multiple cameras, I think that this is kind of where it falls apart in terms of versatility. However, the main camera is still good until today. It has decent dynamic range, photos are very crisp, and the color accuracy is also one thing that I was genuinely impressed about. Another thing that probably makes this my favorite main camera ever is the shutter speed. It's very fast, which means that photos won't come out blurry. In addition to that, it also has optical image stabilization, which does help with getting those clear photos and videos. And if you were wondering, the main camera is a 12 megapixel sensor at f2.2, and it can take HDR photos as well. For video, it can shoot up to 4K 30fps with the standard 1080p ones at 60 or even 120fps. And it can also shoot 720p at 240fps for those cool slow-mo shots. Lastly, for the selfie camera, it's a 5 megapixel sensor at f2.2, and I would say that it also takes good photos with videos at 720p 30fps. So that's the iPhone 6s Plus in 2022. It's almost a 7-year-old phone, but I think that it's still a good deal even today. It checks nearly all the boxes that you would need in a smartphone, like good cameras, good build, a good display, great performance, and good software support. One thing where it falls short though is the bad battery life. I mean, if you do have an extra $60 to $100, then you could look at the used market for the iPhone 10. If anything, I might even actually get a used iPhone 10, who knows. Anyway, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on this channel. Stay blue, my friends. Goodbye.